Morning, everyone. Welcome to an episode of TCG Talk. Back today with another video. And in today's video, I wanted to kind of go over the RTN, I guess, meta, so to speak. What we're seeing right now from a hero standpoint, kind of conversion rates, and then also talk about the calling that was in Utrecht. I'm probably saying that totally wrong. If I am, I totally apologize. But the recent calling over in Europe, talking about that. Um, I'll just kind of give my thoughts on certain heroes, maybe some misconceptions. Just kind of go a little more in depth to try to give you an idea of where the meta seems to stand. The one thing I want to say before we go over it is metas are different. The great thing about this game is it doesn't have an online client like Magic, so how the meta looks like nationally versus locally versus like world is can be completely different. Like yes, there are some heroes that are generally going to be popular and better and do better, but how this meta looks I'm about to show you might be different from your local meta. Like I know certain metas that have like a heavy guardian presence and not much illusionist. I know some metas that are like full aggro. I know metas that are like you play a different hero every round. So it really depends. But from a national perspective, you can kind of see what's going on here. So um, first I'll go over the Road to Nationals Part 1 article that Flesh and Blood put out. This is for article weeks 1 and 2. So this does not include this past week that just happened and this weekend. This is just weekends 1 and 2. But here's the data for RTNs over the first 2 weeks. Won't go over every single hero, but kind of like the obvious things is Briar's heavily represented, right? We have a heavy representation of Phi. We have a heavy representation of, I think that is Prism. Yeah, Prism. And then Viscerai obviously is big. For weeks 1 and 2, Viscerai actually wasn't as high as I thought it was going to be. That was a little bit surprising. I thought people were going to move to Vis pretty quickly. But I think Briar just kind of had a lot of showing weeks 1 because everybody thought Briar was kind of going to be the deck to beat, which it's been showing that it's not. It's definitely a top deck, just not the deck to beat. The surprising things about this list, Katsu having 7% of the meta was actually really surprising. I thought people would just naturally tend to go to Phi, right? Not that Katsu's not viable, it's just like Phi is the new ninja and he's really good. So like, why wouldn't you just play Phi? But it had a lot of Katsu loyalists playing Katsu. So that was really cool to see. Lexi, I thought she'd have a little bit more representation, maybe like 9-10%. But we'll talk about her a little bit in a minute. Everybody else is kind of pretty standard, nothing crazy here. Dromai seeing a decent amount just because new hero. People thought, maybe be really good. And week 1, Dromai actually did really good. She was tied for first in wins and then kind of dropped off week 2. And we'll kind of talk about that. So for top 8, how does this convert, right? 8% of the meta in general is Viscerai, whereas 11% were top 8. So his conversion was pretty good. Briar's top 8 conversion is really good. Fi's is about like on par with how he's represented, so it makes sense. Same with Prism. And Katsu actually went up. 7% of the meta is Katsu, whereas 8% of top 8 meta is Katsu. So Katsu performed really well. So in relation to how they're representing the meta, I would say that Viscerai, Katsu, and Briar actually did the best in weeks 1 and 2. You didn't see a whole lot of Bravo, which I think you'll see more and more Bravo, and like we've seen a lot of Bravo in the last 2 weeks. So kind of going through this. Right now we kind of have this triangle. And this is more recent than weeks 1 and 2, but we have this triangle of like illusionist mid-range, like Dromai Prism. We have aggro, and then we have Guardian. And like I think how good aggro does depends on like what part of the other triangle everybody else goes to. If you see more Prisms, then I think aggro shines better. If you see more Guardian, then I think Prism shines better. So it really depends. And then winning rate, Viscerai had insane win rate at 19%. Prism had a really good win rate at 14%. Briar kind of stayed even for the most part. And then Katsu, again, kind of went down a little bit, 5%. And then Lexi went back up. So once Lexi hit top 8, she did pretty decently. Dromai as well had a pretty good win rate. Everybody stayed about the same. Big surprises for win rates, right? Again, Katsu for me is my biggest surprise at how much he won, even though it was only a couple. We'll kind of talk about the actual like numbers and wins here in a second. But the one that kind of surprised me was Lexi. I thought she would win more than she did, but she really didn't. As we kind of look into here, right? Like, so a lot of these numbers can be skewed based off representation, right? So I like to look at a few things. One, I like to look at who's getting played the most. So obviously Briar is the most played hero, followed by Phi, and then we have Viscerai, or then Prism, then Viscerai. And then the last one should be Lexi, which was actually really surprising as far as most players. I didn't think Lexi would be in the top 5 personally. I thought she'd be ousted by someone else, but yeah. 1 at Briar, 2 is Phi, 3 is Prism, 4 is Viscerai, and the 5th most played hero is Lexi. And then you get the top 8s, right? And number 1 most represented, Briar and Phi again. Viscerai is a close second. And then Prism goes to 4th at this point. And then Lexi actually drops out of the top 5 for top 8s most represented. It goes to Dromai. And then you have wins. Viscerai being first. So Viscerai, once he gets like the top tables, is getting a lot better. It's probably the cream of the crop for people who actually know how to play Vis, not people who are just picking up Vis. And that's not a disrespect on anybody who just picked up Vis randomly. I don't consider myself like an expert Vis player, but there are lines that you're not going to realize when you're just picking up the deck the first time, especially when you talk about Spellbound Creepers. Briar had a good top 8 conversion, but not as good of a 1% conversion as you would like for her to see. Vis basically has a 1 in 4 chance of winning every time he gets top 8, which is pretty nuts. And Phi's win rate, I want to talk about this. So when it comes to meta heroes and like how oppressive is a hero, in my opinion, I would look at what is their top 8 to win percentage, because to me that shows like how good is the hero doing once it gets to top 8 and it's starting to play against the meta, right? And you don't include some of these heroes that really just don't have a lot of representation, right? But kind of, in my opinion, the meta heroes, right? You have Prism, Viscerai, Phi, are kind of like your top 3. Bravo's getting in there now, but he wasn't in as a relation to this article. So Prism, Viscerai, Phi. I think you put Dromai in there, and then maybe Oldheim. I think that's your 5, but the meta's so wide. I'm just kind of giving random ones as far as representation versus performance. So like, Dromai had a 16% win rate to top 8. Phi had a 13%. Vis had a 24%, which is a stupid. Prism had 19%. And then you have, Briar having 11%. So other than Briar, Phi, like if you take Briar, Phi, Dromai, Prism, Viscerai, Phi is 4th out of 5th in that list on like how much he wins every time he gets the top 8. So it's showing like once he starts facing the meta, his win percentage actually goes down pretty significantly compared to how much he's represented. Because I just want to say, because a lot of people are complaining about Phi right now, but he's definitely good. Meta hero, top hero in the game, one of the top heroes, don't get me wrong. But he's definitely not, in my opinion, like a pre-errata Briar or a Chain good. Like he's not. He's very counterable. It's just right now, in my opinion, the decks that counter him don't do well against the rest of the field, which is like Aura Prism, not Aura Prism, gosh. God, where did my head just go with that? Herald's Prism, it's pretty good against him. Still can race her down, but it's definitely better against him. Oldheim obviously is really big against him, but Oldheim struggles into a lot of the other field. Bravo is really good against him. Bravo doesn't struggle as much into the rest of the field, but as long as Prism's around, Bravo is getting countered a little bit. And Icelander, a good Icelander does really good into Phi, but Icelander just struggles too much into the meta right now. So, and even Ice Lexi has a little bit of trouble into the rest of the meta. So a lot of his like natural counters, which basically the top 3 are like Ice Lexi, Bravo, Oldheim, all have really significant trouble into the other half of the meta, which is why it's probably not hurting him as much. But yeah, as it's saying in the article, like your top aggressive decks, right? You have aggressive decks, you have setup decks, and disruptive decks. Really, it really depends on what's kind of what your meta looks like, which is why I was talking about like what's the difference between national meta versus local meta. So how does that relate to the calling, which is more recent information, right? So I'll go into, sorry, we had this backwards. So here was the calling meta game in Europe this week, or as of the recording, at this time recording today. Phi was most represented, followed by Viscerai, Briar. So aggro decks up there. Then you have Illusionist, then you have Guardian, which again, there's the meta right there. You have aggro, Illusionist, Guardian. That's the meta. I'm not saying that like other heroes aren't viable, but that's the meta, right? But then you kind of, if you put it in perspective, right? Yeah, okay. You put it in perspective into day 2, and Prism starts to eke up there, but the 3 aggro heroes are still on the top, followed by Guardians, and then everybody goes down. The biggest surprise for Europe for me was you had 17 Dromais in the field day 1. only 2 of those Jeremiahs made day 2. So Jeremiah really struggled, and I think that's because there's so much aggro representation, and right now Jeremiah is just not good in the aggro. Even her control version just for because Fi is so heavily represented, Fi is just, I mean, it's free mash triggers all day. Briar can pop a lot of her aura, especially on channel turns, makes it really hard. And Briar's just difficult in general. And then Viscerai has a split damage, which she can block a little bit with her Ash Wings, but because his rune chants still go at her and like some of the interactions of rune chants and how they work, and then Mob Sky is automatically hitting and making rune chants and stuff like that. She just struggles into all 3 of the aggro heroes, which is why she probably didn't do well. The next one is 6 out of 16 Bravos made day 2, so pretty good there. And then half of the Prisms. Prism had a 50% conversion rate for day 1 to day 2, which is pretty nuts. As you can see, like, I think the biggest disappointment here was there was 10 Lexis in the event, not one Lexi made day 2, which is pretty surprising. And then not one Rhinar made day 2. Yep, not one Rhinar, not one Kano, not one Azalea, and I think all the dash, and not one dash. So 13 dashes in the field, none of them made day 2. 10 Lexis in the field, none of them made day 2. Pretty nuts there. Then you look at the top 8, and we have 3 Fis, 2 Briars, and a Vis. So 6 out of the top 8 of the field are all aggro. This one Dromai somehow made the top 8, which is nuts considering how much of aggro meta it was. It had to be a really good Dromai player. And then looking at top 4, you had, Fimir, obviously one of the Fis is going to win. Viscerai beat Bravo. I'd love to see that match. That had to be really interesting. And then Fi beat Briar, and then Briar beat Dromai. So you have 3 out of all 4 top decks, top 4 aggro decks. Because Vis is considered an aggro deck now. And then from this, both Fis won, and then the Fimir Fi won the event, obviously. So, what does this mean? I don't think it means anything for the game right now. I'd like to see, like, there just wasn't a lot. There was a fair amount of Guardian representation, right? Like you have 29 Guardians in the field, so you think they would, really prey on these aggro decks, but it was just probably a war of attrition. They probably didn't always play the aggro decks. And it's just interesting to see there maybe wasn't one more, like even these Oldheims, like if this Oldheim got lucky and got paired against aggro decks for most of the time, they should have had a good chance at winning, but you never know what was going on there. So, what does this mean for the meta going forward? It's really kind of hard to tell. I think that Fi obviously is one of the best decks in the format, but I think he is easier. It's easier to counter Fi than other decks. It's easier to counter than, in my opinion, than Viscerai. It's easier to counter than Briar. It's just the decks that do counter it don't do well into the rest of the field, right? Like Lexi, really good into Fi, doesn't do well in the rest of the field. Bravo does better into the rest of the field, but still does not like Prism, and in my opinion is unfavored into Dromai. And doesn't do well into like one-off decks down here as well, right? So I think that that's a little bit hard for him. Decks that I could see like obviously rising. I do think Bravo is going to rise in popularity because it's going to have to be able to counter these 3 decks. Oldheim, I think Prism will stay the same, but I think you'll start to see Dromai be played less and less. I just think she has too many bad matchups right now, as long as aggro's around, unless someone figures out a build that works. I think Dorinthia is going to get better as well. She does really well into a lot of the aggro decks and does really well into even, doesn't do bad in the Guardian, can win it. It's just hard. I think she's like 50-50 in most of her matchups, except for like Prism's really hard, but even some Dories lately have been finding ways to beat Prism. I think she's just getting better. I think people are really starting to figure her out. People are really seeing the power of Glistening Steelblade and really starting to, hit some people with dangerous on hit effects. So we'll see how she does. But I think Dory and Bravo are the 2 like undersold decks to watch out for. And I think decks that'll kind of go down in popularity. I think Oldheim's going to go even farther down because I don't know. I just don't see people playing this a lot solely because I think people are going to go to Bravo. If you're a Guardian player, I think you can play Bravo unless you just love Oldheim. And I think Dromai is going to go down a little bit as well, and we'll have to see. But the meta overall is pretty open, right? Like the fact that we have 11 heroes represented in day 2 is pretty nice. And we'll kind of see, how the meta forms as time goes on. But yeah, Let me know what your thoughts are on the meta, how y'all kind of look at it. For me, I think it's pretty open so far, and it's doing a really good job. The game's in a good spot. I'm still worried when Prism leaves because it's really gonna make it like Guardian versus aggro. But we'll have to see from there. But yeah, let me know what you think. Please leave a like, comment, subscribe if you want to. If not, totally fine. Go to our Flesh and Blood creator, leave a like, comment, subscribe on their stuff so we can get more people seeing this game. And I'll see y'all next time on TCG Talk. Thank y'all so much.